What is your take on how China handled the spread of COVID-19?
Well, the World Health Organization has said that China mounted the most agile, aggressive, and effective containment program in history. And I think that is about right. It's certainly coming through in the figures. We're seeing a decline in cases day on day. So I think the take home is that we have a blueprint, and the blueprint is working. We have the tools. There's research from the University of Southampton which indicates that had China not mounted that dramatic response, they would now have potentially up to 70 times more cases. And indeed, had they moved 2 weeks earlier, they would now have about 85% fewer cases. So again, I think the lesson is all about speed. We have the model, and China have really shown us that if you implement it rapidly, it has remarkable results.
Okay, so taking the conversation away from China, it is spread over 50 other countries. What dangers do developing countries face if containment fails?
Well, I would argue that, in fact, in many ways, containment has already failed. We've seen cases seeded now into Nigeria, India, countries with some of the most fragile health systems. And of course, there are many millions of vulnerable people there put at risk. But the challenge, of course, is if you have an outbreak that is out of control in a very populous country, it creates a challenge for the world. And you've seen in Italy cases being seeded all over the world from a containment failure there. We could predict that the same may happen from these very large countries with weak health systems, and that may, of course, end up seeding clusters for months or even years. So it's beholden on the international community really to move quickly to support countries with weak capacity, really immediately.
It is surprising because, in Hong Kong, we're just hitting the going into the three figures over the past month, and then Italy jumps from to thousands in a week. So I think my question is, what do you think other countries are doing wrong?
Well, I think a number of countries have just moved too slowly. We clearly have the recipe, if you like, from the Chinese experience. But the lesson from that is you've got to move extremely quickly. If you look at, for example, the USA, as of Sunday, they tested 500 people. Now, China are producing 1.5 million tests a week. There needs to be a much more rapid scale up of capacity on the ground all over the world. It's not good enough to wait until you have cases. And if you look at leadership, in China, they appointed a minister to lead every different aspect of the response. That kind of leadership from the top is also really, really important to drive the bureaucracy and the disease response all over the country. So I think we've learned really, really important lessons. I think it's true that the world is not moving rapidly enough, and days count in an outbreak like this.
I really have to be careful with this one when we discuss, the big one. I think I do have to ask you, will it become a pandemic?
I think probably yes. 90% of new cases are now outside China. We've seen ongoing community transmission in countries outside China. But I think the critical thing is not whether we can put this back in the bottle like we did with SARS, because our response is in a sense unchanged. No country can afford to have an outbreak that's out of control. And it's really important that countries move quickly to get it under control, because a slow burning epidemic can be managed by health systems. It creates less disruption and doesn't require such draconian measures. But where you see a fast moving outbreak out of control, the level of disruption can be extreme. So pandemic or no, again, we have the blueprint, and we just have to move extremely rapidly from this point forward.
Well, will the outbreak of COVID-19 change the way countries interact with each other in the future?
We are all in the same boat, that we all rely on strong health systems globally, and where you have countries that are spending less than maybe 100 or less than $50 per year per person on health, the world is not safe. So if there's one positive take home, is that you need a level of international solidarity to keep the world safe. I think the other take home is around communication. It's extremely important, looking at Singapore's experience, for example, to bring the nation along with you. Then the acceptability of your control measures increases, the effectiveness of those measures increases. So communication is really critical, and I think that's a major take home.
Well, an interesting global perspective from you today. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thanks very much.